Have you wondered what financial advisors actually think about finances? This is your sneak peek at the conversations within Financial Design Studio. Michelle Smallenberger, the CEO here, will be your host as you go behind the designs.
Welcome to Behind the Designs. I'm Michelle, one of the 4 financial advisors here at Financial Design Studio. Our firm exists to bring confidence to your finances so that you can live more and give more. Often our job becomes about helping clients figure out for themselves what does it actually take to live a fuller life. So in many episodes of this podcast, we're sharing the conversations we have with those who have found what this looks like for their life. Today, our guest is Anna Lewis, the executive producer of this podcast. And Anna would argue that living more really means living with less. Thanks for joining me on this side of the mic, Anna. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I love this topic and I'm excited to talk about it.
So I think this is going to be great. I think something that we could probably point out is, Anna, you're probably more of kind of like an essentialist, someone who kind of lives, makes decisions, in that way. I'm probably more of a non-essentialist, where more is more. So I know this will be great and just like a good discussion to think through what we're really challenging people with. So why don't you just share a little bit? I know you said you're excited to talk about this. Why is it that you're excited to talk about this topic?
Yeah, I love this idea of less but better. That's something that is found in the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown. The West is so obsessed with, like you said, more is more. Is more really more? And so as Financial Design Studio has that motto of we want to help you live more and give more. I think that living more means living with less. And so I hesitate to call it minimalism because then you think it's, you're only going to have one chair. And I hesitate to link it to Marie Kondo and does it spark joy? Because then you're thinking this is just a decluttering project. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. Today we want to talk about why less might help you live better. And not just less with your stuff, but less with your time, less with your money, less with your relationships, all of that. And that's kind of why I called it the Anti-Consumerist Manifesto, because it's an argument against consumerism and this mindset that's just invaded the West.
I think it's great. One of the things as we've kind of talked about this is even if you find yourself not being someone who would say, I'm an essentialist or I'm not, however you define yourself, I think we can all probably find ourselves if we point back to some points in life, whether we've just graduated from college and we're living on less because we're just starting out with that first job and we make less, but we still have a lot of expenses to cover, whether that's student loans or rent or a car payment, things like that. So whether you call yourself an essentialist, you can probably point back to points in time where you say, I had to kind of live like this. So I think this applies to everybody if they aren't always living like this.
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely say this applies to everyone. This isn't a how to live frugally tips for people who have a $100 budget. Nope, this is for everyone. There's a book that I love called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And one of the things the author, John Mark Comer, points out is 0.7% of the world owns 45% of the world's wealth. Those are the crazy rich people who have a car and more than one pair of shoes and the money to buy a latte at Starbucks this morning. And that's kind of crazy because that's us. We are those quote unquote crazy rich people. We hold most of the world's wealth here in America. And I think here in the West and in America, we can just spend our money so frivolously, just on more things, just on more stuff. And is that the way it should be?
Yeah. I think this is going to be helpful. One of the biggest things, by the end of this episode, we're going to talk through kind of the history of how we've gotten to where we are, but also giving you really questions to ask yourself. So at the end of this, it's how do I figure out what's important to me so that I know that I'm consuming things, using my resources in a way that are actually important to me. Whether you would call yourself an essentialist or not, or that mindset, or really operate with that. As we apply this to finances, kind of just here early on, one of the things that's really interesting as we were talking about this is I can tell you that from doing hundreds of plans, over many years, not one plan that we have created is exactly the same. So the great thing is that really everyone is choosing. It looks different. It looks different at different ages. They're doing different things at different times in different ways. And so it is kind of interesting in this discussion where I'm kind of seeing, people almost believe in, okay, well, if these are the results, then let's go with it, like really believing in what they want to do. So I think that might give us a little bit of insight into, this discussion, but that's really what we hope people do with this is figure out what's important and then jump on that to actually believe it and act. So why don't you kind of set this up, Anna? I guess, what would you say this isn't?
Yeah, this is a critique on the West's idea of consumerism. Now, that could easily be misconstrued into this is a political commentary on either the left or right. Nope. This is neither. This is just an honest critique on the West's worldview. This is not a call for us to return to a monastery-like life. Like you said, Michelle, people have these beautiful financial plans where they do all these incredible things in the world. And that's only made possible when you make money and when you're able to, outsource things and when you're able to bring stuff in. I'm not advocating for everybody to go buy a plot of land and grow their own crops and only own 2 chairs. That's not what this is at all. This is a call for us to choose what's actually important and what actually brings the most value into our lives. This episode should hopefully give you a good idea of why consumerism is accepted by the world, why it's not the solution, why it's not ideal, and why we shouldn't be living this way, and my alternatives. However, of course, this is my personal perspective, and I'm just hoping to challenge you.
Yeah, no, this is great. So why don't we just start there? Why don't you kind of explain and help us understand, like when you say consumerism, what does that mean kind of historically?
Yeah, so the history of consumerism is super recent. Consumerism and this idea of we can just go buy all this stuff, that is very new to the world in the history of mankind. And in all the research I've done in all my history classes, I can point back to the 1920s as kind of the start of this. When we think of the 1920s, we instantly think of the Roaring Twenties and the speakeasies and the new refrigerators and all of this technological advances that were happening, which made people wealthy as they created inventions and people had more money to spend. And so they wanted to spend it on a good time, which of course leads to the stock market crash of 1929 because people were living beyond their means because they were so excited. And so when it all fell apart, everybody realized that they actually were living way beyond their means and the banks didn't have the money to cover that. And so that was America's first kind of real taste of consumerism because of World War I. So after 1929, we fell into the Great Depression, which is a very well-known moment in American history, and it swung to the essentialist side. So we went from this age of great excess and decadence to this age of being very frugal and very disciplined and very purposeful because you might not have a meal tomorrow. So then people always talk about how World War II and Franklin Delano Roosevelt is what pulled us out of the Great Depression because we're going to war and we have all these projects to do and we got to build up the workforce and people need jobs and, all of the stuff that comes with war. So America enters World War II and we build up this massive new industrial complex with all of these new factories, all of these new technological advances like plastic. Our ability to produce greatly increased beyond, anything that anybody's ever seen in the history of humanity. So we come out of World War II and we still have all these factories, we still have all these workers, we still have all these people who need to get paid. And so the focus shifts from we need to win a war to how do we keep producing? And so then that kind of leads us to where we are today. These factories, these companies, these, business owners needed to find a new way to keep producing. And so they needed to keep buyers interested. That led into the 1950s. When people think of the 1950s, they think of, housewives in their cute little dresses and the men going out to business in their fancy cars. And again, it's back to that age of decadence and that age of excess. And that kind of never went away. In the 1960s, we think of, the hippies and their kind of protest against this lifestyle. But that faded into the 70s and into the shopping malls of the 80s and into the 90s to where we are today. Think about the 2000s and Black Friday sales and the crazy stuff that goes down at malls as people are just trying to buy, 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 buy. Think about Times Square, and that's just covered in advertising where people are telling you to buy, 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 buy. And coming out of World War II, we need to keep people buying. So that's the history of the production that happened and kind of what led us to this consumerist built world.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think even today we can get things at our fingertips delivered to our front door tomorrow. So, it's just gotten like closer and closer and easier because it's really kind of how do we remove these inability to get these things, that kind of the blocks to get what we want or need.
Exactly. It's gotten so much easier to buy. It's gotten so much easier to consume. And that's the economics behind consumerism. In Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations from 1776, he talks about the birth of capitalism and how the division of labor is what would create a world like this. Because you're really good at, managing your accounts at your business, you can pay somebody else to grow your crops. You can pay for somebody else to groom your dog. You can pay for somebody else to take care of all those things for you so that you can focus on what you're really good at. This has allowed companies to get really good at producing things very quickly and getting them on our doorstep very fast. And the speed of this has only increased. And then last, there's one other thing that really drives this forward, and that's advertising. There's a book by Edward Bernays that came out in 1922, and it's called Propaganda. And what lots of people don't know is this book is what inspired Hitler's propaganda campaigns and Joseph Goebbels and how they built their propaganda war machine. It came from this book, as Bernays talks about how to use certain things to evoke emotions in people so that you get a certain response. Well, after 1945, advertisers took these propaganda techniques and started to plug them into their marketing to make it more effective. I'm in marketing, and one of the things you're supposed to do is create a design that evokes an emotion in people. Isn't that exactly what propaganda is supposed to do? It's supposed to evoke an emotion in you so that you get a response. So all of the horrible propaganda that we're afraid of from the 1940s, it's alive and well in our modern advertising. It's not innocent. It's not friendly. It's not, they're not trying to be your friend. They're trying to make money. And so they are going to use actual World War II Nazi tactics to get you to buy. Maybe that's a little harsh, but it is the truth.
That makes me so excited to go shopping, or actually makes me like not want to go shopping because now I'm like, I do think that all of us can, at some point, if you find yourself as someone who, is like kind of looking for the most recent advertisement, or you do want the latest and greatest of things, at some point, even if you get those things, I do think most people probably have some type of response where they say, I don't need all of this. I don't want all of this. This is, okay, great. I have it, but it didn't do anything for me. So there are results from it too. So why don't you kind of talk to us about what is the problem with all of this that we may feel at different times?
Yeah. So I would say this is a problem because we in America and kind of the cultural West have been trapped into this rat race built by companies looking to produce. These companies are producing, and so they need to find a way to sell. And so they've built the world in such a way that it's forcing us into that trap. We're told in all these advertising with all these tactics that more is more. But when is more enough? When do you have enough? And I think we all know it's never going to be enough. Somewhere inside of us, we know that nothing will ever satisfy. And so that's why I argue, well, then maybe less but better is the answer. So There are a couple actual problems that come out of consumerism, and one of them is how consumerism builds this culture of haste. And so, what I mean by that is you are always rushing, and you are always rushing to do the next thing, get the next thing, be at the next place. And that's a byproduct of consumerism because A, you're either working all the time, you're in this constant state of I need to work more, I need to earn more money, I need to, be on the job, I need to work overtime, I need to, get the next promotion. Well, why? Why do you need to do that? There's a famous proverb and story that I love where there's this fisher who's laying on the bank of a river, and he knows that all he needs for that day is to catch fish so that he can eat that day. So he's caught his fish and he's laying relaxing. And a businessman comes up to him and sees this man being super lazy, just laying there. So this businessman asks this fisher, "What are you doing? Why aren't you getting up and working?" And the fisher said, "Well, I've done what I need to do for today. I have food." And the businessman said, "Well, why don't you get up and train some other people to catch fish? And then, they'll catch you fish and then you can manage them." And then, he's building all these systems for how he can get more out of life. And the fisherman said, "Why? So that I can have time to relax in the end? I'm relaxing right now." And I love that juxtaposition of we work so much so that we can have time to relax. But if we just relaxed and didn't have to work so much, maybe that's the answer. And so I'm not saying quit your job. I'm not saying that you shouldn't work really hard. I'm not saying that you shouldn't shoot for the title. But I think that it's a lie we've been sold, that we need the next promotion, that we need to have a bigger job, that we need to have a better title. But it's just not true. So in that sense, the culture of overwork contributes to our idea of haste. But that also makes us more anxious. I mean, just look at the social stats. We are the most anxious group of people the world has ever known. And why is that? We're so concerned about having the next. We're so concerned about doing the next. We're so concerned we're not measuring up. We're so concerned about not being good enough. We're so concerned about our public image that we become so anxious due to the idea that we're not producing enough or we're not consuming enough, which both go back to that consumerist problem that I am arguing against. They're so concerned about what they're consuming that it drives their mental and emotional state. Their well-being is based off of what they consume. I don't know what it is for you, but just think for a moment. What are you so concerned about having to maintain your image that it actually affects your well-being? That's crazy that we would let a company dictate our emotional well-being. That's absurd. And so we fall into this state of hurry and haste and overwork so that we can maintain a certain quality of life. And who determines what that quality of life is? The companies? I think that that's crazy, and that's the fallacy I'm trying to point out. And then there's another issue with the culture of haste. It's that clutter is actually a problem. There's a lot of scientific studies that have been done. The more stuff you have just laying around, the worse your mind is. And I don't quite fully understand the science behind all of it, but just think about your work desk. If you have papers strewn across and your pencils are everywhere and your laptop is on one corner and it's not plugged in and the cord is draping over everywhere and you're really stressed because you have a project due, how does that desk make you feel? Probably really bad. And so think about your home now. Think about what's in your car right now. Probably there is a lot of stuff. And chances are that stuff has a home. Your books go on the bookshelf, your pens go in the pen cup, but it's still a lot of stuff. Your brain has to hold it still, and your brain doesn't do that well. And so there's a lot of science that you can read up on that, but that's something that I think gets so overlooked. Our stuff can have such an impact on the state of our mental well-being as well. And that's not what companies want you to think about. Companies just want you to think about, it'll make you happy. Okay, but what about when it sits in your garage for the next 20 years? How does that make you feel?
one of the interesting things I've thought over the years is, your stuff does consume your brain. I used to think, like if I'm sitting on the couch and there is something that like needs put away, and maybe it's been that way for like 5 days, but you haven't gotten to it or someone hasn't gotten to it, your brain still thinks about it. And it becomes frustrating to the point that you finally do it, but all of that energy that you expended thinking about it while you were sitting trying to relax. Another thing too that I can think, and just the things that you've kind of already shared is, and it's interesting, on a Friday afternoon in the summer, if you're able to sit and enjoy the beautiful day, just being outside, listening to the birds, in the sun, it is interesting that, just sitting there, I have felt at different times that actually feels like being that you're the wealthiest person around, like I feel so, not rich isn't the word, but I feel so privileged to just be able to sit in silence, enjoy a beautiful day without all of these other things, like you said, that we usually feel if we find ourselves in the clutter, in the busy schedule. Really what the opposite of that brings, that big breath of air, just that sigh to actually think. And in that book, Essentialism, they do talk about setting aside space to actually be able to think. And so as we kind of keep going through here and we say, how do you figure out what that is for you? You have to actually set aside that time. And I think this is what everybody has to go through, those points of something, I didn't like this, that uncomfort or discomfort, to actually think, then what is it that I need? What does I need to change?
And I love that you highlighted how it feels like you're wealthy. It feels like luxury. It feels just so good when you have space like that, like on a summer day. I think that that's at the core of what less but better means. You need to find for yourself, what does the best mean for you? And I think a lot of people forget that often it means having some margin. It means having some space. It means doing less. It means having less so that you can have the space. So I love that.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because I think we all watch movies where, there's people who, are just enjoying being outside, whether that's on the farm or whatever. It's very simple. And, they're like peaceful. They enjoy it. Like, this is where I belong. Or they go to, a busy city to work, and then they go home and they're like, but this is where, it really is. And so I think we can see and point back to times, and it kind of begs the question, like, have they really figured it out? Almost like what you're kind of trying to say and lead to here is, okay. But again, this is like for everybody. The interesting thing here, as we think about this and talk about this is where this is such a subjective decision for people. You decide for you. No one else can decide these things for you because they don't know what's important to you. And even if they do, they don't know, I think what that feels like, what's meaningful. There's a lot of other things. So this is where you have to think through, what is it that's actually important to me? No one else, I think, can objectively tell you this is what you should do. They might be able to offer suggestions and you try it. But I do think it's interesting when we kind of start thinking, how do I untangle this, So why don't you keep telling us a little bit more about what this looks like and kind of the problem in addition to what you've already shared.
Yeah. So obviously there is a lot more that is wrong with consumerism than just how it makes us hurried. Another thing that I've noticed, and one of the things that I actually wrote a lot about when I was in college, was how consumerism has made us a peekaboo society. And so what I mean by that is when you play peekaboo with like a little kid, you're going to cover your face and you're going to reveal your face. And the kid gets so delighted. And then you cover your face again and it's gone. All that delight is gone. That rapid pace, that kind of skimming the surface, the rapid fire, just transition is what our society is known for. Think about all the ways you multitask. Think about all the conversations you have in a day while you're working on a project. We've become, in a sense, like the kid playing peekaboo. It's just so surface level and it's just so instantaneous and it's gone. So there's no room for depth to happen. There's no room for any kind of moments to let it rest and sink in. And there's a book that I read called The Image by Daniel Borstein, and he pointed this out in such a great way. He was talking about how when you watch the news has become such a commodified product. Their whole goal is to get you to consume. And so they've thought of 1,000 ways to get you to consume. And one of the ways is to segment things so that you have no chance to process what's going on. For instance, they will say, mass shooting terrorist attack. And now this, Taylor Swift is at the Chiefs game. And so that rapid shift, that rapid just emotional transition leaves you no time to let either thing really sink in and have any kind of depth. How in the world does Taylor Swift's presence at a football game have any kind of significance compared to an actual terrorist? And yet they're grouped on the same page all the time. We are just so used to moving along and not letting things sink in that it's created other problems for our society. We're so used to consuming quickly that we don't let things kind of sink in, and we don't let the vibrance of things rest with us. And this is a problem because traits like creativity, things like innovation, need time. If you want to build a relationship with somebody, you need to give it time. If you want to have an original thought, it needs time. Time and just a significant pause where you're bored is required for that kind of depth to be achieved. You have to let the roots sink in for any kind of meaningful growth to happen. And so our society, because we're so driven by this need to consume more, go faster, we don't have any true concepts of originality. And here's an example. Think about the movies that you see in the studios right now. Never before have we seen more movies coming out. And yet, all of us will walk out of the theater going, well, that sequel was just a repeat of the original, or that was a dumb idea, or what were they thinking with that character? It's no longer this well thought out, well crafted, intentional product because the time needed to produce something to be consumed is shortened. And so you're going to walk out of that movie theater and walk into the next tomorrow, and it doesn't matter. This peekaboo society doesn't stop there, though. That's not where the problem ends. So many have no concept of their self. They are just who they put on social media. They are just who is going to be popular. They are just who the society will accept. They don't have any original, tastes. They don't have any original ideas. They don't have any original perspectives to share because they're just trying to fit in. And so they're just trying to consume more. And I think this is a problem that lots of different psychologists have highlighted with Gen Z and Gen Alpha. These new generations that are taught and built by this consumerist world, they don't know who they are, they don't know how to stand out, and they don't know how to be themselves because they're so worried about fitting in, and so they just consume what everybody else consumes. But that's the society that we're building today for our world tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. I think what's interesting too is how many times, as we're trying to, be creative, whether that's what's the next podcast, what's a client gift, what does that look like? That creativity and trying to be unique. And even one of our episodes where we had our friends Chris and Kathy on talking about making those holiday parties, making them unique and creative. It's that type, that is today what stands out so much when you think of giving a gift or doing something like that, and you do it in a creative way, or it's a creative thing that isn't just something you can buy off the shelf. I do think those are the things that are more meaningful to people when they experience them or receive them. And also how many times, as we're talking about this and we're trying to think of something creative, how many times will we say, oh, this morning in the shower, I had this thought, or as I was driving here, because those are the times that we aren't, rushing. We've actually stopped to just take the shower, or we've stopped to drive to work or wherever that is, and we actually have some time and some capacity. So I think even if you think about if you've had times like that, you can say, okay, yes, that is when I have the time to think freely to be able to figure out a solution for this or some way that I want to do something differently that might be better. So
100%. The last kind of issue that I want to highlight with consumerism is how it makes us so comfortable with cutting corners. And I don't want this to come off as political in any sense, or this isn't an advocate for any kind of environmental, policy. This is just a commentary on the fact that we are using a lot of resources for no good reason. And all this production probably isn't good for planet Earth. And the people that we're exploiting to do it, that's not ethical. And so consumerism can numb us to that fact. We are so okay with this happening that we don't even give it a second thought. When we think about slavery in America, it appalls us. But when we think about some single mom in, Asia who has to work 7 days a week just to feed her family so that we can have the trendy new joggers, why doesn't that cause us the same horror? And so I think companies have done a really good job of numbing us and of telling us they're working on solving the problem while just moving the problem overseas. And I think that that's something that if we really care about our planet, if we really care about the people on it, we should be working to find other solutions. And another thing that this does is the waste it creates. Those lithium batteries for your Tesla, which, hear me out, I love Tesla, but the lithium batteries, those don't die, those don't disintegrate. You just bury them, and then they kill the plants around them. That's terrible. Or those Ziploc bags you're using, those don't disintegrate, those don't break down. Those sit in trash heaps for hundreds and hundreds of years. Those will be around long after you're dead, and you're going to use them for one time. We're just senselessly creating all this waste and causing all kinds of problems. Again, this is not any kind of environmental or sociopolitical labor law advocacy. This is just pointing out a problem that is there and we can't cover our eyes to it. And consumerism is why we have this problem. So there's a funny SNL sketch that just came out about a company called Shimu, and we all know what Shimu is referring to. And the SNL actors are acting out like a commercial for Shimu, this low cost fast fashion company. And they ask the question, "How do you do it, Shimu?" And they go, "Don't worry about it," because they're not doing it ethically. They're not doing it in a way that protects people or protects the planet. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do think what's interesting, one thing that is encouraging is if you're looking for ways today, I think one nice thing is that I have seen different brands, different products in the way they're delivered. I can think of like laundry detergent, for example. They send you a bottle the first time you get it, and after that, you just get a refill pack, mix it with water, and use it. So again, like decreasing plastic. I can think of a bunch of small examples like that. Clothing that is actually organic, like things like that. It's at least encouraging that there are people, like I can, just think of, examples of that are out there on a wide scale. So that's at least encouraging. And hopefully, if someone says, "Oh, I want to take action because yes, I do care about this," they are out there. So you can research and find things like that. If you say, "Okay, yeah, I do want to try a little harder to find some of these. They are, you do have to do research and they may cost more. But again, the quality or the reason that you'd be buying that versus the other options, it is encouraging that there are at least some, things out there that we consume that you can find that kind of do the opposite of what you're saying, for what most products do. Yeah.
Yep. And that's exactly kind of what we're going to get into right now. What's the challenge? What's the response? Rather than mindlessly make these choices to do all of this damage to our society and our people and our planet, and for things that we don't even really agree with why we're buying them because of the advertising, or we don't really support, having all this clutter. Why are we doing this? And so the anti-consumerist response and challenge is, well, make your own choices then. Make a choice that you care about and make a choice that you're passionate to make. So first, my challenge to you is, don't let anyone tell you what your values are. If your values are to take care of the planet, then why are you buying from the quote unquote Shimu that SNL talks about? Do your research, figure out what companies you can support, and give your money there. Spend your money there. Spend all the money you want there, but choose what you value. I think at the heart, essentialism, this anti-consumerist mindset, this minimalism, is about choosing what you love. So, for instance, I don't have a lot of stuff, but I love books. If you are watching the video right now, you can see I have a bookshelf behind me. This is one of my 4 bookcases because I love books and I love to read. If I was really a traditional minimalist, I would say I own 1 book and I use the library for all other resources. But I don't do that because I love books and I want to own them. And so I choose to spend my money on books because I love books and I get a lot of value out of them. I would challenge you, what is it that you actually care about? Spend your money on those things. Enjoy those things. But don't waste your money on the things that you don't really care about. And so my example for this is, think about all of those half-used lotion bottles you have. Think about all the half-used face care products and just random self-care items that you might have laying in your bathroom drawer right now. How many of those products do you actually use? You might be somebody with a super elaborate skincare system, but how many of those things are you actually using? How many of those get left aside and used once a month? Do you really need that? Is that really adding to your life? Is that a company you really want to support? Is that a tool that is really making your skin better? All of those kinds of questions are things the essentialist asks because they want to make the fewest and best decisions possible. And sometimes that means you make a lot of choices because those are the best decisions available. Sometimes it means there's just a lot of excess that you just don't need. And so don't let these companies tell you you need to buy more just so they can meet their bottom line. No, make your own choices, decide what's actually valuable to you. Second, and probably more important, is it actually good for you? Is the amount of stuff you consume actually making you a better person? Is it actually deepening your relationships with those around you? Is it shaping you into a more patient, more compassionate, better human being? Probably not. And so when we think about all the stuff we want and all the stuff we need to do and all the stuff that, is around us, I think we forget to ask that more important question of what is this actually doing to me? And that's why essentialism matters. That's why this anti-consumerist mindset matters, because consumerism doesn't help us. So yeah, those would be my challenges to consumerism.
Yeah, I think something that's interesting is in that essentialism book, it kind of gives kind of like this framework almost for, now these are used in examples of like time, where they're saying, okay, use a scale of, 0 to 100%. And you kind of say, okay, what percent do I think I should do this event or this thing comes up? And you say, okay, what percent do I think I should do it? And you might be like, oh, I'm 90% like in, but I don't think I should for this reason or whatever. So you kind of assign it like a 90%. And they're basically saying if it's 90%, it's a 0. Like if it's not 100% where you're all in, then you're not in. I think this is where someone like me struggles with, okay, how can it be so kind of cut and dry? I absolutely agree with this framework of starting to ask yourselves questions. And I think this is where, like, even personally, I would say I am of, okay, do I need these things? Am I using these? I think that's where I kind of start is, am I using this stuff that's just laying around? And then, okay, do I need it? Because even if you use it once a month, it's once a month. And if it has a purpose and a value, use it. You may decide that's important to you. But it is like this thought of, do I need it? Is this good for me? Like, these are good questions to be asking so that you yourself can decide for yourself, okay, maybe not. It's just like, it's so funny because I'm hearing this and I'm like, oh, that's so hard, But I do think over time, as you slowly ask yourself these questions, you do find, well, no, that's not important to me. Nah, I'm okay without it. And no, I didn't even think about getting it. You'll see how, that shift happens, I think, naturally.
Yeah, and so for you, as you're thinking, "What? This is so cut and dry. How could you say that?" The final kind of reason you want to think this way is because your energy is not infinite and your time is not infinite. Once it's gone, it's gone. And so the essentialist is asking, with my limited time and my limited energy, how can I get the most out of it? And so the essentialist is saying, I want to focus on only the things that matter to me the most. And so for you, it might be relationships. And so you might go to the party even though you're tired because you value your relationships more than anything. Why would you spend that time doing anything else? Because that's important to you. And so the essentialist is really, like you said, getting at the heart of what is important to you.
So, for example, someone who's going through different stages of life, you're working, now you're retired. I didn't have time to travel before, but I spent time with family. And now I want to travel more, and that's really important. Can that thing change, or was it kind of that all along? Like, time with family was important, but now it's okay. Travel with family, like the thing that you're doing is different, but the time with family is what has always been important.
And that's why there is no one answer. That's why this is so subjective. However, what doesn't change is your values.
Another question I would have too is, one of the things we're not saying is that the essentialist or minimalist, anti-consumerist, like whatever, we're not saying that this person is the person who is the millionaire next door or has the wads of cash under their bed or whatever. Like, that person could believe so much in the things that matter to them that they're spending all their money doing it. So I think it's very interesting that we're not saying this person, because they're so wise and they've figured out what matters to them. Like, we're not putting you on a pedestal, we're just saying you've figured out and you have a framework for what matters. And now you run that through the other decisions that you make.
Yeah, you go all in on what matters. And because you're doing less, you can do the things that matter and you can do them to 100%. The 80-20 principle where it says, only 20% of the things you do are what gives you 80% of your return. That's essentialism. Find the 20% of things that you really care about, the 20% of things that will make your life really meaningful and valuable and make you enjoy it, make you feel like you're the wealthiest person in the world. Focus on those things and you'll get 80% of the return. So I think the next obvious question is, okay, well, how do you do this? How do you live this out? And so I can give you the things that I do in my own life. And like we said, huge disclaimer, this is not I am prescribing this to you, because it's going to look different for everyone. But what you need to start with, really consider what is essential to you. What are those 20% of things that if you could just have these 20% of things, nothing else would matter? So easy ways to identify what that is. Get rid of the things you don't use. Get rid of the things you don't love. So maybe that's looking at your calendar and deciding that X, Y, and Z, just you don't love it, so you're not doing it anymore. Or maybe that's, going through that bathroom drawer and finding the items you aren't using, the items that are half used that you're never going to use again. Finding those things and just cleaning them all out. Maybe that's going through your garage and you have 2 hoses. Why do you have 2 hoses? Get rid of one of them, going through and just getting rid of the things that you actually are not using. Don't be indecisive. If you think you don't use it, but you're not sure, set it aside. Put it in a box. This is something that I love to do. If I'm not sure about something, I'll put it in a box. And if I don't touch it, I don't use it. Because I would have to pull it out of the box to use it. But it's still there so that I know, oh, like if I need it later, it's there. And after time, I've kind of freed myself from that item because I go, I haven't touched the box. I know I don't use that item and I'm not going to miss it. So get rid of the things that you don't use. That's a really easy tell for what's essential. And second, choose the things you love. And so this is where you need to think through, what are those things you love? Maybe you love your summer nights. Maybe you love collecting books like I do. Maybe you love traveling. Maybe you love going to Disney. Maybe you love time to watch movies. I don't know what you love, but figure out what those things are. Maybe it's time with family. Maybe it's cooking a meal. Maybe it's, I love to rollerblade. And so I make time in my week to just rollerblade around my neighborhood. Find out what those things are that you really do love, that make your life exciting and make you enjoy living. Those are the things you want to focus on. How can you build your life in such a way that you focus on those things? And most of the time, you'll discover that those things aren't items. It's not stuff. It's not more things. And that's the catch. Because the stuff that you care about is likely to be something you do with your time. And so the essentialist says, how can you then not focus on stuff? How can you set your stuff to the side so that you can focus on the things that matter, which aren't things at all? So that's one way to go at finding what's essential to you.
That's helpful. Yeah. So this is kind of a helpful walkthrough to kind of say, okay, I can even think, some that are just financially, when we're saying if people are trying to get out of debt, for example, there's some basic rules that you use around those things. And I think those are some of the things you kind of have in your list. Why don't you walk us through probably some of those that maybe apply even more to finances?
Yeah. So if I were to give my personal financial essentialist tips, and again, these are just things that I do in my life. These are the things that I choose to do with my money because I've identified what's essential to me. One thing that I do is I like to choose experiences, not items. Because, like I said, the things that are important to me is time with my friends and time with my family. And so that means I'm saving for a vacation. I am setting money aside in my budget to go out to dinner with people rather than buying a new sweatshirt, rather than buying a new, be it what it is. So that's one thing I do. Another thing I do is, and that you can do, I think this is something that people overlook, is put a limit on the money you can spend. And so what I mean by this is, even though I did just graduate college, I live at home, so I have no real expenses. So all of my income could be fair game. However, I make it a point to send most of my money towards, accounts and savings in different directions so that the money left over for spending is just limited enough that I have to think about a purchase before I make it. Is this really the thing I want to spend my money on right now? Or would this money be better served going out for dinner with somebody? So if you put limits on the money you have to spend, that it forces you to think about what you're spending on, so you don't have unlimited freedom. It helps you be more intentional with the purchases you're making. And with that, another thing that I do is I wait before I make purchases on stuff. So like that box example where you're setting the stuff aside and putting it in a box, waiting to determine whether you really need it. I will put things in my cart and I will sit and I will think, do I really, really, really actually need this thing? I do this with my books. I have a rule where I can buy one book a month. And so I will put a book in my cart and I will really think, is this the book that I want to buy this month? Is there a better book I could buy? Is there a newer book that I want? Is there something else that's going to come out? And I wait before I make these purchases so that when I make it, I really am satisfied with what I'm getting. Another thing that I do, and this is probably a little more extreme of me, I don't like to be around advertising because I know why it exists. I know where it comes from. I know that advertising is just a bunch of trickery and peer pressure, and I'm not a fan of that. And so I don't choose to be around advertising. And what I mean by that is I don't follow social media brands. I don't go on social media that often. I don't spend time in malls. I don't spend time at stores beyond what I have to because I don't want to be around that. Like I said earlier, these businesses have built and put you into a trap that forces you to consume. And I don't want to be part of that trap, so I'm not going to spend time in it. So that's something I do. Not again, these are my personal rules, but that's something I do. And in that, you call out the lie. Another interesting thing that I do that I think is worth mentioning is the practice of Sabbath. Sabbath is an idea that comes from Judaism, and so the ancient Hebrews, they were told in the Old Testament Bible that they should Sabbath because they used to be slaves in Egypt. I read a really interesting breakdown of what this means and like why Sabbath, the practice of taking a day off, is related to slavery, like how the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. And the author, John Mark Comer, talks about how Sabbath is a form of social justice because you are taking a whole day to say, you know what, I'm not going to consume anything. I'm not going to buy anything. I'm going to stay home and I'm going to read. I'm going to spend time outside. I'm going to garden. I'm going to, do the things that are restful and filling for me. And I'm not going to participate in the rat race. And that is a way for you to take a break from social injustices that happen through consumerism. Now, to be fair, one person doing that doesn't make a whole difference, but it is a choice that I can make that helps me feel like I'm making an impact when all of us find the thing that help us take a stand against the injustices we feel are being done. And if we make the decision to follow through on something that we believe will stop it, that's what makes a difference. What ways you can live your life in such a way that it aligns with your values. Maybe that means only buying from certain companies. Maybe that means you don't buy from others. Maybe that means you do something like a Sabbath, or you give your time to volunteer, or you give money to an organization. Whatever it looks like, I think it's worth considering and bringing that giving more into your actual lifestyle. Which leads me to my last point. One thing that I do is I give. And I think everyone should give money, whether you're religious or not, whether you care about social causes or not. I think giving money is super important. And so even if you're just giving to the homeless person on the side of the street, I think that you should have space in your life to give more. And if you're so busy spending money on your Range Rover car payment and your rent on your super expensive house and all of these things, and you don't have money left over to help somebody on the side of the street, maybe you should reconsider what's actually essential. Because I think if you're not giving until the point where it's uncomfortable, you're not quite doing it right. And I know that we talk about at Financial Design Studio here, our clients do such a good job of giving. And we love that we're able to help our clients give so much to make a difference in the world. And so if you give regularly, well done. I'm glad to know that that's something that's essential to you. And I would challenge anybody who doesn't give, think about some things that you might care about. Think about some causes you might be passionate about. Why not give? What's stopping you? Yeah, those are some financial things that I do with my money to align with my more essentialist mindset.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's like a good framework for people to basically take that, ask yourselves these questions, and really that's what we're saying to do, is to go through and say, what's important to me? So what does that mean? How do I practice that? Just like you've put together, here's what I do. What does that look like for you? And that, I do think that's the encouraging thing. One thing that, again, in that essentialism book, that's interesting, just talking about rest is, they make the point of sleep and how it actually helps you to be more productive by sleeping. It's interesting because a lot of these things that we're talking through, the opposite of what we would think sometimes is actually what's true, or what we feel better doing. And so, having less stuff actually makes me feel better because I now don't have to manage it and use all of my time and energy moving it from one spot in the house to the other because it doesn't have a spot and I really shouldn't have it. But I just keep doing that because I'm not able to let it go. I do think it is very interesting. So I think this is helpful. That is one of the things that is so encouraging to me too, is, with our clients, and we've added this up over the years, and we just keep doing this to see like how much are our clients giving. And it's so encouraging when we see just that spirit of generosity and, being able to give a little bit. I have what I need, but I can help someone else in whatever that is that matters to you. There's so many different ways you can give too. I think that's really cool. There's also, ways that you can give with your time if it's not your money. And in all of this, I think what's so interesting is, just like we said at the beginning, is everybody's solution or response to these questions looks different. Nobody's looks exactly the same. The way they do it, what they use, their resources, their time or money or energy, whatever it is used differently, looks differently at different times of their lives. It can be in different ways. And I think that's what's so exciting. Our tagline for our business is designed for life. The point of that is that you're using your finances, because that's what we help people do, is that we're able to help you use your finances to live life with what's important to you. And two ways that we love, to encourage people to do that is living more and giving more. And so those are, again, the way you do that is different for everybody. So I'm hoping that this is encouraging to people just as a good chance to stop and think, well, what am I doing today? And could I be doing it differently or better? Am I doing it in a way that when people look at it, they say, show me your calendar and your checkbook and I can tell you what's important to you. When someone looks at that, they could say, oh, this is what matters to them.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of essentialism. You find that you build a life that you really, really care about because it's only the things that you care about. And you're able to go 100% for them because you're able to give all of your time, energy, and money to the things that really matter to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Anna. Any closing thoughts? I know this has been a great encouragement and kind of understanding the history of where we've come and encouragement to really sit and think about what we're doing in this area.
No, yeah, I think the only thing I'd say to you guys is you might know what's essential to you. Maybe you don't, but even if you think you know what's essential to you, take time to write it out, sit down, think about it, and figure out if it's actually playing out in your life. Because often the things that we think are essential really aren't. So don't be indecisive, don't be wishy-washy, sit and think and actually consider and actually cross some things off your list so that it's only the valuable few left.
Great. Thank you. Well, thanks for joining us today. I hope this conversation has sparked some new ideas for you about how you can redefine what living more means. You can find any links or resources in our show notes for episode 59 at financialdesignstudio.com. And if you're looking for help bringing this kind of clarity to your financial life, reach out. Our team would love to hear from you and see if we can partner with you and your family. And until then, we'll talk to you in our next episode.
Thanks for listening. To find any links or resources related to this episode, check out our show notes. Your host was Michelle Smallenberger, a certified financial planner and CEO. The guests featured are from Financial Design Studio, a team of experienced, fiduciary, fee-only advisors based in Chicago. Anna Lewis is the executive producer of the Behind the Designs podcast. And as always, for more information about Financial Design Studio and who we are, check out our website, financialdesignstudio.com. And final note, no content discussed on this podcast should be taken as financial advice. Financial Design Studio accepts no responsibility for your individual choices. We'll see you in the next episode.